Hey everybody, it's Terry Battisti with the Bass Fishing Archives. I'm sitting here at the National Fishing Lure Collectors Club meet in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and it's an honor to be sitting here with Steve Blazer, the originator of the Tennessee Toughy crankbait, but what most everybody knows him for is the crankbait that became known as the tap. And Steve, it's an honor to sit here with you. And
well, thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah,
it's an honor that people think so much that, you know, like you do, wanting to do this, and the reception that I've had here has just been unbelievable.
So this is your first meet, right? Is this the first time you've been to one of these?
Oh yes, yeah. I never even knew anything about lure collection until this meet. I mean, I knew some of the guys that I'd see online and stuff were collecting stuff, but they were just collecting each other's baits. You know, I didn't know that people were collecting and all these different baits, and that they were collecting a lot of the old baits that were built way before I even started and stuff. I had no idea. You know, I'm kind of the guy that, you know, I get a bait, I go fishing. You know, I don't collect. I've got two of my own baits that I've collected, and I've got a bait from two different people, a bait each, and I put them up just because one was from a special person, and the other one was just a beautiful bait that was hand carved and is a bluegill type bait that I'd never seen painted like that before, because I never did any real elaborate paint jobs back when I was building baits, and this thing was elaborate, and I couldn't fish it. I just couldn't.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I started bass fishing in 1974, and I'd use the lunch money that my mom would give me to save it all week, save it for a month, and then she'd take me to the tackle store and wonder how I got all this money. But I bought Bagleys and, you know, Rebels and Rapalas, you know, all the stuff that we fished back then, and used it. And people dig through my tackle boxes now and they go, "My God, you got this collection of..." No, they're not. It's not a collection. It's baits that I still fish.
Yeah.
So, but what got you into making crankbaits?
Well, I got introduced. My cousin introduced me to the Carolina Killer, thin flat-sided plug. Not probably everybody knows about it. It's a really good bait, caught lots of fish, but it just was made out of such soft balsawood that if you had a good day of fishing, you had a plug that was tore up, and I'd have to repair it. And I fished those plugs and I repaired them, and I really didn't want. And I tried their foam plugs; they didn't catch fish. And I didn't really want to spend the money on the balsawood plugs and have to repair them all the time. Yeah. And so
because they were $6-7 a piece back then, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, that was a lot of money for a crankbait back then.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that. And after I had gone through all mine, then I decided that I can do this better. I can make something that will last. You know, I didn't know that I could build one that would catch fish as good as that, but I knew I could make one that would last. Yeah. And so I wanted to try, and that's what I did. And I started out with. I didn't even really sand down the corners or nothing. I just cut one out and made me a wire form and glued the two sides together and put me a weight in it and took a lip out off a Carolina Killer and stuck it in there and went and took a paintbrush and painted something. I've still got it, but it's at the house. I mean, it's ugly.
Number one, right?
Yeah, number one, but it's ugly. And I never sold none of those because, you know, I just took it out and I threw it and I fished it for a while and it'd catch a few fish, but you know, it wasn't nothing impressive or anything. So I thought I need to start doing something different, because now I know I'll make them run, and that's the important thing. They got to run right.
Yeah.
And I wasn't concerned at first about building them real strong unless I knew I could build a bait that was going to catch fish. And so I started with a second one that looked something like this, but it didn't have this big belly. It come on back here, and I sanded on the top of it. I sanded a little fin in it. So if anybody's got one out there that's got a little fin on the top of it that's been sanded into, that's my second bait. And
The first one that you sold.
yeah. The first one I sold those, and they. I don't know if there's any of them still around or not, but if they do, you know, these collectors around here, they might give you a whole bunch of money for it, you know, because I mean it's really old, and they were crude too. But I did have a little old cheap airbrush at that time that I was painting with, but still they weren't very pretty.
So this bait here,
that's got the Carolina killer lip.
So this is his design number 2. You can see the deep belly on it, real thin bait. And the bill for this bait is not a coffin bill, but it's a bill that he took out of Carolina Killer. So let's go to the other question that a lot of people have is, golly, I don't want to break it.
Oh, you can't break that finish. It's the hardest finish there ever was.
So same body, but now Steve's gone to the coffin bill. And can you tell us what made you go with the coffin bill?
Yeah.
You're the first person to ever put a coffin bill, to my knowledge, in a crankbait.
Right, yeah. And to my knowledge, I never seen it anywhere before, and I'd seen lots and lots of lures, but never seen anything like it. And it come out of necessity, because this radius on this lip, which this is stamped out, because I can see
the stamp
right here. I can see the dye mark right here on it.
Yep.
And you have to get this radius perfect, because if it's too big on one side, that's the side that plug's gonna, and you're gonna be bending wire and that nose wire and trying to get this thing to run right. And if you get it to run straight, it'll still probably be running on its side like that, and fish just aren't too interested in baits that don't
track straight.
Right, and and if they run to and leaning over, they just don't have near as much interest in them, because minnows just don't do that. They're like this.
Yeah.
And so I needed to do something, and so I thought, I can't cut that radius, but I know I can cut straight lines with a sander.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started drawing, and I come up with this coffin bill lip, because it kind of matches,
Yeah.
It still has about the same
Width.
area and width and everything on it, and I purposely designed it to try to match the amount of area on a round lip as with my coffin bill lip, because I was looking to get the same depth.
Right.
And I was sure I was going to get a different action, just simply because of the way this bill was going to catch the water, react to the water, and roll off these sharp points. And
so that was another question I have, is what did you notice about the deflection ability of this bill compared to a round bill? Was there any difference? Or?
Yeah, there some round bills will if you hit a stump, they'll run off, and if they got them designed right, and they'll track back quick. And that's what this one's not so much, because of the way the body designed on it, but this one and this one, when it hits a stump, it'll run out, and it works hard, real fast, to come right straight back. So it's getting right back in front of that stump.
Wow.
Before it gets out here real far. A lot of round bills, they'll get out here and they'll stay out here, and they'll just keep running. They won't be on the bottom or anything digging that way. It just won't track right once it gets out there, because that lip won't allow it to do that.
Okay.
And I don't know why, but it won't allow it to do that. I have never had one of my baits with either coffin bill that wouldn't come back on track
Almost immediately.
Yeah, now this, like I said, because of the design where the weight's at in this one, it'll get out farther, but it will come back. But now that's not to say that I didn't build a lot of baits that come through the water like this all the time to start with. You know, I was experimenting, and I was, you know, and I was playing around. So I had drunk type baits, you know, coming back. But I said, nope, that won't work. Let's find out what I did wrong. And
wow. So you got your second bait, and that thing, and you were selling these for
$4 a piece.
That was the price that the tackle shop paid.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you go from this bait to the pointy nose. I mean, what was
right?
You can see that bait there. I mean, it's gorgeous. It looks to be a little thicker.
It's that's a half inch, and these are 3/8. And it looks even thicker than an 1/8 of an inch on it, but they are. That's just all it is.
Bigger lip on this, and so you're saying that this is two pieces of balsa that are sandwiched together. The through wire goes through it, the weight system, the whole 9 yards, and that's also you can, you know, keep everything perfectly lined with center mass and all that.
As long as you don't clamp too tight and smash that balsa wood, because when you do it, I use epoxy, and that epoxy would seep into that balsa wood, and if you took and compressed one side of it, and that epoxy would hold that compression, then your weight was off center. Didn't matter too much about the wires. I mean, they don't have nothing really to do with the operation of the bait, other than holding it. They're there to hold hooks. And that's it.
Yeah.
And to tie your line to. And if you did that, your weight was off. If it come back out most of the way, I could get them to run, but if I didn't, you know, there's your front plug, or it would get out here, or it'd hit the bottom, and then it'd take off running that way. And they're hard to tune, and it just wasn't right. And I built these for a while before I ever started building this one. And I seen a boy come into a shop, the old Tackle Shack shop, and he was making his out of 1/2 inch, and I love the difference. See, I can put a broader black back on it.
Yep.
And just, you can paint them up so much prettier, and I liked that. And I thought, I'm gonna get me some 1/2 inch, and I'm gonna try it. Well, you know, and at the time I was just buying my balsa wood at the local hobby shops that we don't have anymore. That you can't, you know, you got to order balsa now if you're gonna get it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. Is I started building this one. I worked on this one, and I don't remember what made me determine the lip angle, but I do remember fretting over that lip angle for a long time, because I was wanting a deep diver, and they dive deeper when they come out straight, but it's kind of hard to put this one out straight on this, because of that pointed nose.
Right.
And
you don't want to break that pointed nose.
Right, and most everybody's deep divers had slanted lips in them, because the one reason is because a slanted lip gives a wider wobble. Okay. I mean, you can't control that wobble even with weight, unless you put so much in there that it just sinks to the bottom and it don't want to do nothing much.
Yeah.
So I remember fretting over that for a long time before I ever decided on an angle, and I finally decided that on this angle, and put it, you know, and took it and fished it and tested it and caught fish. It done well, and it done well enough that Bass Masters Classic was one on it.
So that's the bait. It wasn't the tap that was the Classic was one on. It was this bait.
The first one. Okay.
The first one,
yeah, and it was fished exclusively in that. This bait was only fished the last day.
Right. Yeah.
But this bait was fished all the way through, and then of course everybody knows it now as the RC.
RC. Yeah.
From Pose. You know, they, like a lot of companies do, they take advantage of the little guy, and they did, and they put this out, and of course there wasn't nothing I could do about it. I mean, they was in California, I'm in Tennessee, and so, but anyhow, that's, you know, I kept building this bait and letting letting them build that bait, and they didn't do a very good job of it because a lot of people didn't like it very well. Some people liked it real well.
Completely different wood too. I mean,
they were using cedar.
Yeah, Poe's was all made out of cedar, and yours is.
And you cannot, if you design a bait out of balsa wood, you can't make it in any other kind of wood or plastic and get the same action out of it. It just won't happen. The densities are way too different, and then you have to change the weight you have in your bait to compensate for that density.
Yeah.
And when you do that, then you're starting to change everything. Of course, they didn't build the same lip. They had the coffin build lip, but it wasn't nowhere near what I had. You know, I worked this out on the drawing board for quite a while until I was happy with it, and it worked great first time out, and so I never changed it. And I liked it, and then that's to say I got to drilling and putting the weight in through here. It makes it much simpler when you don't have two pieces of wood that you have to deal with, because once you get that dead center in there, and I had a jig
that aligned it up to your drill press.
Yeah, perfect every time. No matter if the wood I was using was a little bit thinner or a little bit thicker than the piece before, it would still, didn't matter. It dead center any thickness, it would center it automatically out. And so all my weights are centered, and that's why my plugs run so true, is because I went to the extremes of making sure that everything was right. You know, like I do my wife.
Everything was consistent.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah. No variation.
No, because once you get one right, when you get your test models right, you better remember everything that you done.
Yeah.
And how you got it there, because you want everything else. Because if it's a real fish catcher, you definitely want everything to be the same, or you're going to be building a lot of baits that do a lot of different things, and fishermen are not going to be happy with you, and they're not going to be buying your lures. And And I always built baits first for me, and I chose this design. It took me a little while, I took my time on all of them to come up with this body shape, and I really regretted coming up with that pointy nose, because I had to sand that down. And that was not fun at all, but it has more of a shad shape to it. That's what I was wanting. This don't look like anything that lives in water, maybe other than a
deformed bluegill.
or something went wrong with the crawfish or something. But it don't look like anything. But they can't. There's a lot of lures out there that don't look like anything that lives in water, and they just catch a hound out of fish. You just never know. But I wanted something that the fish could relate to.
Yeah.
In sight. And I've always been a big believer that a bass will never, ever put anything in its mouth if it can't see it. And if it sees it and it likes it, then it's going to put it in its mouth.
Yeah.
Now how they see baits in some of this muddy water, I have no idea, but I'm still convinced that they can see it good enough. They'll get close enough to it to be able to identify that that's something to eat, other than something. You can imagine all the things that they've heard falling in the water and everything, year after year of their lives and stuff, and they go over and investigate it, and it hits the bottom, and it just sits there, and it's not to eat, but I had to go and look at it anyhow.
Exactly. It's like when someone opens a refrigerator door, it's like,
yeah, especially me. You can see.
I'm getting there. Oh man! So bait number 2, the pointed nose. I mean, this is an absolutely beautiful bait. So you've gone now from using 2 pieces of balsa, and now you've gone to a single piece where you're not sandwiching the 2 sides together.
Right.
You're drilling the holes for the weight. You're drilling the hole in the back, or is it just a little teeny, like 1/8 inch hole that you're slipping the wire tie, or the
Yeah, it's a very small. On these is a very small hole, and I would put epoxy down in there, and then take this wire and put it in there, and I'd turn hooks on each end of it so that it couldn't pull out, because that epoxy bonded that wood, and if the tail don't come off, then that wire ain't going nowhere. I mean, it's there.
Yeah.
I mean, I've hung them up and jerked and pulled them and plug knockers, and you know, I've never knocked one loose. I've only had one bill to ever come out, and that was my best friend. He did that. And we were fishing together, and he threw out there, and I seen it hit on the bank, and he started whining. I said, "What are you whining about?" I said, I thought his line broke. I said, "Your plug's up there." He said, "No, it's not." He said, it's coming back to the boat. It's running." I said, "No, there ain't no way. I can see that plug right there. I know." He said, "No." He argued all, and when he got it back to the boat, he lifted it up, and it was just the lip.
Just the lip.
That lip run by itself.
Oh my gosh! What are the odds of that?
I knew right then that there was never going to be a change in that lip. If it could run by itself, they was something special about that design.
Oh,
What
that's
it was,
hilarious.
I don't know to this day, but you know, I knew then that there would be no change in that lip. Ever, period. You know, that's just, it was, yeah, it was. He pulled that up, and I mean, he was laughing. I was stunned. You know, I knew what just happened, and it didn't dawn on him what just happened. You know, he was without a plug, and I said, "Well, we'll go over here and get your plug."
Oh, jeez.
I said, "I don't know how you done it, but you knocked that lip out." Now, I mean, I've never ever had one to come out other than that one that I know of. And I've had a lot of fishermen come up and talk to me about the lures over the years, you know.
Yeah.
And nobody ever complained about quality, so.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. So when you started with the coffin bill, you were doing this all by hand.
Yes, I cut that coffin bill out by hand.
Yeah. And then you went to a press.
Yeah, I had dye made.
Yeah.
That good friend of mine made the dye, and I just about drove him crazy about what I wanted. But I knew what I wanted, you know, and if I could get it and I could afford to get it, then that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to stamp this out and stamp out the hole in the back of it, so that the glue going through that hole would hold the top and bottom of that slot together, and actually keep this lip, if it got loose, it wouldn't get real loose, and it would still fish for a while till you could get it, you know,
Back glued up.
And I wanted 2 little holes punched in up here to put my wire through, and he said, "Well, I can't do that part." He said, "Because that's smaller than the thickness of the material, and you can't put a hole through something smaller than the thickness of the material." I said, "Well, then make me 2 marks right there. Make it where it just puts 2 little marks there where I can drill out." Because he's such a good machinist, I knew that was going to be dead center. I mean, I give him one where I used to measure them all off and mark exactly where that was it.
Yeah.
To be drilled at. I give him one of those, and he went to town, and this is what he come up with. And he had to make a die that wouldn't punch through and drop out like a lot of dies do, drop the piece out because of that hole in the back of it. It was a separate action, so it was 2 actions in one punch, and so it had to push it back up. So there was a plate below that actually went down, and then it pushed it back up, and that die is sitting down on the top of this, and it pushes it back up in that plastic. And so it was stored in my plastic strips, and I have 4-foot pieces of plastic strips, you know, with
That you're just pushing through the die, and boom, boom.
Yeah, and every time I pushed my foot down, it popped one out, and I could do it was nothing to do 1,000 of them a day. So I mean,
Wow.
making the bill, once I had that, making that bill was absolutely the easiest part there was to it, other than putting the wire in it, and that was tough because I drilled a hole smaller than that wire, so that when I put that through there, that wire would not. There's a lot of baits out there that wire will wiggle in, and when it does, it's not going to run right.
Yeah.
It's going to be harder to tune, and I wanted to make sure because I'm anal. And you can ask my wife, she'll tell you. And she says, "You just too much of a perfectionist." I said, "No, I just want it right."
Exactly.
And
Well, it's done right the first time. It doesn't have to be done again, right?
right. And that's, and that, I mean, my dad taught me that, you do it right the first time and it's done. So do it right, and don't take the garbage out to the can and sit beside the can, because you're going to have to go back out there and put it in the can eventually.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's how I learned those lessons. And I like this bait. It was a good bait. It caught a lot of fish, and apparently other people liked it too. I mean, it went all the way to the Bassmasters Classic, and it done well. And
So, what took you from this design to what eventually became known as the tap for Ronnie Tap?
yeah.
What was the progression there?
Well, I was wanting one that would go even deeper, and I was wanting one with a tighter wiggle. That takes a straight lip, so that means a whole redesign of a crankbait.
So let me interrupt you real quick. What is the depth of this lure?
That's 3-4 foot.
3-4 foot, and then this one
That
probably
one,
8-9.
No, that one would get down to 8. It was really like a 6 to 8.
Okay.
Yeah, even though that lip was in there, with that lip being at an angle, it won't let it go as far.
Okay.
And then when you got them out straight, then you're going to get as deep as you can get with the body that's behind it. You can't. There's no other way to get them any deeper, and of course with the weight that you put in, it has something to do. But I consider that all part of the body.
Right.
But that's how. And I wanted a deeper diver, and I wanted a tighter wiggle, and that's all I knew that I wanted, so I had to design that. With there's a plug out there, the commercial plug, that I really liked the way the back flowed. I always liked it, and I said that's really, really nice, because I'd take and look at all these manufacturers' lures, and I'd see, what I liked out of them and what I thought they did really well, and that back shape I liked real well.
What bait was that?
It was a, shouldn't have asked me.
Oh no.
It was a, Bill Norman.
Oh, okay.
It was,
Little end probably.
no, it was the bigger bait. As a matter of fact, that bait was just about the same size as this, because I laid it down and I took and I drew that back on there. And I did, and I never did modify from that back. I liked the way that back flowed, and it looked good. And of course, the better your lure looks, the more they're going to sell, because people pick them up and buy one. It's pretty.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll catch fish. But the bottom part is all my design, and I designed this bottom part to be like it is because of aesthetics, for one thing, and to get the action that I wanted, to get to get a faster diver. I wanted, I didn't want something that, like a lot of these deep diving plugs, they start here and they go at a long angle before they ever get to the bottom. Well, they hit the bottom a few feet and then they're back up off the bottom and coming up to you. I wanted something that just went almost straight down.
Yeah.
That crankbait right there goes down as fast as any crankbait I've ever seen, anywhere.
Wow.
Anywhere.
And what's the diving depth of it?
This thing will go, it's 8 to 10 foot. I've had several that would get to 11 foot, and I've had other guys tell me that, but I've had a couple that would actually do 12 foot. Now, why? I had never figured out. I even asked those crankbaits, how do you do that? Didn't get no answer. But I never figured it out. I knew everything was the same about it, but there was something different about it. I don't know if it may have had to do with the time of year I was throwing it, and the water density would be different, because the hotter the water is, the less dense it is.
Yep.
And so but I don't remember all that, but I never did figure out why I got 2 to go to 12 foot, and I'm the only one that's ever had them to go that deep that I know of. Nobody ever told me that. A lot of people were surprised when they first started fishing this, and they were getting it down to 10 foot. They just said, it's just unbelievable that thing would go 10 foot. I said, well, that's what I was shooting for, and some of them, most baits, it has to do too with the density of the balsawood. And
So how did you select your balsa?
well, I knew I didn't want the soft balsa because of the Carolina killer. So I started out with the medium balsa, and I was buying my balsa wood from hobby shops because they have a whole bunch. And I was buying so much from one hobby shop, the guy told me, he says, here's a number, call it. I need to keep some wood around here. And I bought my wood from Sig in Midwest. They had excellent balsa wood, and they had it in 3 grades. They had soft, they had medium, and they had hard. And people think balsa wood soft. Wait till you try to sand a piece of hard balsa. You think you're sanding oak.
Oh man!
I mean, it is hard. It's still light, but it's a lot heavier than the medium. But it is just hard. I couldn't believe it. I only did 1 run of those, and I said no more, because man, I hand sanded everything. And
so you weren't using a router?
Oh yeah, I used a router, but then I fine tuned everything by hand sanding, because when I routed this tail was wider than that. It looked like it had little wings. And so I would sand that down thinner, and that's why some tails on them are thinner than others. Just
because it was hand done.
Yeah. But I always try to get this radius as close as I could, and take out the sharp edges on it so that it would go through the water better.
Yeah.
I know a lot of guys today, they're not doing that. They're just rounding it over. They don't sand that sharp edge down, and it just it fights the water. That's your enemy as a bait designer, is the water. And the water depth, the deeper you go, the more pressure there is, and the more it's pushing back on that crankbait, trying to push it up. Not trying to push it down, but it's trying to push that bait up. A lot of people, I don't think, realize that, but it's squeezing it, and it's squeezing it hard, and
it's physics.
Yes, it is. And I don't know anything about it, but I do have I have a lot of common sense. I don't consider myself really all that smart, but
your common sense. I mean, I have an old adage that I like to say is that you can take 2 kids, and one of them's dumb and one of them's smart. You can take that smart kid and take him out of school at 8th grade, and if he's got common sense, he's going to be a success. You can take that dummy and put him through a PhD program, and he still can't tie his shoes.
Right.
That's why I wear slippers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's all common sense. And it impressed me that the density of the water changes with the temperatures and all that stuff. I mean, you were thinking of all that when you were putting these baits to the drawing board.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember back then. I could remember a lot of things, and remembering, what I studied in high school and stuff about different things like water and stuff. And I understood that, the deeper you go, the more pressure there is, and the denser the water is, just because it's cold. You can't compress. Water cannot be compressed.
No.
It's the only thing in the whole world that cannot be compressed. It can be expanded, but it can't be compressed. And but it can be pressurized, and it gets a lot of pressure the deeper you go. And all you have to do is just go to a lake and start going down, and you'll feel it.
Feel it in your ears.
Yeah. And you can ask some divers. They got to try to breathe down. I don't know how they do it. They get down there 300 feet deep, and your chest has got to go in and out. You can't breathe.
Yeah.
How they do that, I don't know. But anyhow, You know, and I tore a lot of plugs apart. I tore palos apart, you know, wooden baits. Tore palos apart, tore bagleys apart, you know, examine them and see, because I needed to learn how to make a one-piece plug. And of course, I started doing that with this one.
Yeah.
And I needed to find out how they were making a one-piece plug. And I knew from the wood baits that you could just glue that lip in, and it don't have to. A lot of guys come way back here. Well, you're weakening that wood, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
You don't have to go that far back. That's 3/8 slot. That's all I've ever used. And it holds well. Of course, you have to use a good epoxy. And today's epoxies are far superior than when I started. They're just except for what was in commercial businesses that nobody could get a hold of.
Yeah.
But, you know, today you can get a hold of epoxies. They're just not going to let go, and they glue to a lot of different kind of materials a whole lot better. They bond to them a lot better.
So the lip slot was done with a bandsaw and a jig, right?
No, because it was done with a bandsaw, but when I cut this body shape out, I also cut that lip slot out. And I had a real thin lip slot right there. Yeah. And that was my guide when I because it was flat, you know, they're flat, so
yeah.
They said you can get a good square cut on it. And I bought a bandsaw blade that was the same width as that cut the same width as the lip, and I put me a stop on that because they're wide. Them big blades that cut that wide are real thick, or real wide. And I put me a block of wood back there and clamp it down so that all of them were going to be 3/8, and I'd just sit there and I'd follow that slot that I'd already cut. And I always glued my lips in the very last thing, because the finish I use, which ain't nobody gonna find out, would eat these things like targanol. That old targanol, you'll see a lot of the old baits, you'll see them around here where the guys dip the whole thing down in there, and it just started working on the lips, and the guys started learning. And a lot of these that you see, the whole lips dipped, the guys quit doing that later on because it was a lot slower. The finish I use, man, it loved to eat on this stuff. And
so the lip was the last thing that went into the bait after it was fully painted, colored, or clear coated. Everything. Wow.
Because if I put that clear coat on and it got on that lip anywhere, there was going to be a very weak spot there, and it would break. So and that's how I come up with putting that hole. I don't think the first ones of these I did, I put a little hole in there, but that's how I come up with putting the hole in there, is so that it would glue through too and help hold this thing in even better, because a lot of the epoxies back then didn't stick to Lexan very well at all. And until Ed Chambers give me some that come out of a woodworking factory, and it was actually brown looking. It was transparent, but it was brown looking, and I didn't like the color, but I loved the way it held. And so I used it. Now I use clear on things, and it stays clear, and it looks better, though I don't do a pretty job of gluing lips in, because it's a habit of trying to push baits out the door as fast as I could, because I had people hollering at me all the time, where's the baits, where's the baits? And so, I kind of get a little bit sloppy, and there's probably there's a glue fingerprint right there that I didn't got out, because I'd get it on my fingers, and I'd have to rub the plugs down, because they'd have them on them and everything. And but these new epoxies, these guys are going to be starting up, DevCon and all of them. They don't buy off-brand epoxies. Buy the really good stuff. Pay the money for it, and it's going to hold up. It won't.
Right.
It won't disappoint you, and it won't disappoint the guy that you sold the bait to, and that's the guy that you really don't want to disappoint, because he will go tell everybody.
Exactly.
He will make sure, because when it gives, it's going to give when he's got a big fish on.
Yes.
And he's gonna be really mad, and he is gonna let everybody know about it. So, those things you have to think ahead on when you're designing and trying to build a bait. That's why all my baits always got tested with a 50-pound piece of lead tied down here, and I had a cord tied in there, and I'd pick it up and hold it there for a minute, and if it stayed together, it was good. If it didn't, or if it even give any little bit, I went back and
Right.
started working on it. But I used a 50-pound. I don't know any. I know one boy now. After he heard that I did that, he's using 40 pounds of weight, and he said, "You reckon that'll work?" And I said, "If it holds 40 pounds, it's gonna hold anything." I said, 40-pound weight will snap any rod made out there, so you don't have to worry about it.